America, we are live. Thank you for joining us here. This is Crisis in America. We're hearing from the Black Millennium women respond. We thank you for joining us here today. We're going to wait just a couple of minutes as we get started. We're just going to wait a couple of minutes. I want to invite you to come join. Tell your friends, share this conversation. This is going to be a dynamic opportunity for us to gather together as a family and hear from one another. And so we invite you to tell your friends and to share it now. We'll get started in just about 1 minute from now. 1 minute from now, we'll get started. Ladies, if you care to, please share it on your social media. To our guests, please share it on your social media as well. You can go to my Facebook page, Barrett Berry, or my Facebook page, Pastor Barrett Berry. It's going to be an amazing day, everybody. We thank you for coming. This is Crisis in America. The Black Millennial women respond. These are America's leaders. This is Leadership Talks with Barrett Berry, and my co-host is Torian Sitton. We're excited to have you here with us today. We'll get started in about 30 seconds. 30 seconds, give you a chance to share it as we go live around the world. Share it with your friends and loved ones on your social media. Let everybody know that we're here and we are ready to share it. Hear from leaders. All right. We'll be starting in about 15 seconds. We're doing a pastor's 15 seconds. It's like having 3 or 4 closes. As I close. All right. Your friends. So really excited about today's conversation. Bear with us. We'll get started in just, as you get a chance for you to share it with others, we'll get started in just 10 seconds now. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Let's go ahead and get started with tonight's conversation. Really excited to have a distinguished group of leaders here with us today. Here we are. So we're joined today. I'm Pastor Barrett Berry of the Empowered Living Church. So excited to have you here with us today. We're having our series of conversations, and God is doing some amazing things. But the world is in a crisis, and America is in a crisis. And so we thought it was appropriate, Tori and I, we thought it would be appropriate for us to bring people together and to have these conversations about what's going on in America. And so we have a distinguished panel. I'll let Torian go ahead and say something to the people before we get started. Tell them who you are and where you're from, Torian.
Yeah, so I'm Torian Sitton. I'm me and Pastor Barry. He was my pastor for a couple years, and so he invited me to this panel. But I'm here in Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm a business analyst by trade. Worked for both banks, Bank of America, Wells Fargo. Now I'm doing consulting in the IT realm. So that's who I am. That's what I do. I'm also a minister at Faith Harvest now. Where Bishop Randall Borders is my reigning pastor. But as well as I'm glad to be joined. And I wanted to get with Pastor Barry and to kind of learn more and hear more. We'll let the world know, more of what the Black woman is feeling at this time. And I thought it was important that we hooked up and bring you on and kind of learn more and hear what you have to say to the world.
All right. Let me go around and introduce our distinguished panel. We have Dr. Denise Crawford Monday. That's it, Monday?
Monday.
I got it right. She's a sociologist of crime and gender. She has a special interest in how marginalized women manage their experiences within the criminal justice system. I met the good Dr. Denise. We were in grad school together in Harvard University, Harvard Square. We were in Bible study together on Tuesday night. It was the Black graduate students Bible study. Yes. We studied the word of the Lord in the square as well. Yes. She is a distinguished scholar within herself. Her scholarship also addresses diverse areas of research, including community police relations, identify formation among black women, and relationship dynamics between young men and women from disadvantaged communities. And so we're really fortunate to have Dr. Denise here today as well. She's currently a associate professor of sociology and criminal justice at Wingate University in the great state of South Carolina.
North Carolina.
Oh, North Carolina.
North Carolina.
And the Carolinas. All right.
Yes,
So we're
yes.
excited to have her here today. And then we have Sister Mariah Powell. Sister Mariah Powell, she is a young minister. She's ready to change the world, and she has a voice and a thought to change the world. We're excited about her dynamic ministry and what she's doing currently right now. At 17, she gave her life back to the Lord, and she hasn't stopped yet. She's a YouTuber and author. You can find her at her YouTube page. Google her and find her at Mariah Powell and get inspired with her anointed ministry there. And then we have Keanu Osborne. Keanu Osborne is a community organizer extraordinaire. Yes, she is. She most recently, if you live in the Charlotte area, Charlotte community, she helped organize this amazing peace vigil of churches. Had about 3,000 to 5,000 people gathered together this past Sunday. It started with just a Facebook post, and it just blossomed from there. And she is leading a leading voice here in the great city of Charlotte. Her passions is the applied research and communications manager at For Charlotte, which I'm a part of for the church plant group there. And she also serves as board chair of ChristLink, a nonprofit that seeks to remove barriers to mental health care in underserved communities. And so we're ecstatic to have her present with us today. And then lastly but not least, my good friend, Trishonda Sheffy. She is an extraordinary woman. Born in Texas, she has a very unique background. She was raised in Okinawa, Japan. And so she brings diversity to the table just by being present. How many people know somebody who was raised in Okinawa, Japan? I don't. Oh, anyway, she is. So we're excited to have her here today. She's a graduate of Auburn University. She and I met when we were in law school at Valparaiso University there in the great state of Indiana. She's worked on a number of campaigns in digital media campaigns, as well as she's worked on Capitol Hill. And she's a great mix between Hollywood of the West Coast and the Hollywood of D.C. And so she's worked in the office of the House Democratic Caucus, and later she was communications director from a woman I appreciate and love, the representative from Texas, Eddie Bernice Johnson, as well. And so she has been in D.C. She currently resides in Los Angeles, and she is a producer and writer, and she plans to have her first project come to the world, actually in 2020. And so she's producing her first film, and we're so excited to have her present with us as well. So as you see the world, we have a dynamic panel of women leaders who are ready to really take on, I want to say, the world, not just America, because as you see today here with things that are taking place, this is a world movement. The world is interconnected since the passing, since the murder of our brother George Floyd. It seems that the world has been energized, and the empathy and the sympathy that's being shown and being displayed throughout the world in varied countries we didn't even think they were paying attention to us, have taken to the streets and are really expressing their anger and frustration, not just with the killing of George Floyd, but with the other atrocities that have been going on for years and years here in America. And so with this new consciousness in the world and here in America, I think all 50 states at this point in time have had some sort of vigil or protest in regards to the treatment of Black Americans here, Black folks here, people of color here in America. This is a critical time where we can actually address the crisis with some solutions. And so we brought together this panel because we've been having these panels of other leaders. We had a panel of white men last past Tuesday, and that was a great conversation. We had a diverse panel before that, and then we had some university scholars, the panel before that. And I think it's important that we hear from the diverse voices that are out there. And one of the key voices right now, there's been talk of Vice President Biden's possibly selecting an African American woman, a black woman, as his vice presidential candidate. I think it's important and imperative that we allow, not only just we allow, that we get out the way and let those who are leading lead. And so I believe that we've gathered here a group of women who are leading, and their voices are key to what's going on right now. Today is the birthday of our dear sister Brianna, who was killed in her home. She would have been 27 years of age today. She was in Louisville in her home when they had a no knock warrant. They came into her home and she was slain by the police. And from my understanding, they reopened the case, and so it's her birthday. I didn't know it was her birthday when we planned this, but I think it's appropriate and it brings things together that God is in the mix of these things. And so, ladies, let's go ahead and get started. I want to give you a chance to really, I'm going to ask a question first. Just tell us what's on your mind tonight. The theme is Crisis in America. We want to hear from the Black Millennium voices of women leaders. Express yourself today. So let's go ahead and allow my clock, well, my screen has Dr. Janice first, and then we'll go to Mariah, and then Kiana, and then Shonda, you close us out in this first segment, and then Torian, you go from there. Dr. Janice, what's on your heart?
So, this isn't the first conversation that I've been a part of this week. And, the recurring theme is this sense of feeling exhausted, really, right? Of repeating the narrative of a life lost, and having to fight for justice, having to fight to be seen. And I will say, one of the things that has encouraged me in what is an otherwise disheartening situation is comparing what we're seeing now to the 1968 protests and riots following the assassination of Dr. King. And after that protest, after those riots, the day after, in fact, Lyndon Johnson realized that the world was on fire, the country was on fire, and called Congress to put forth the Civil Rights Act of 1968, which had been sitting on, the House of Representatives desk, basically going nowhere. And within 6 days of Dr. King's assassination, that bill, as well as fair housing, was passed. And I just think about that and compare it to what's happening now, that it's not only happening here in the United States, but there have been protests in, New Zealand, Australia, Paris, London, all over the world. And my hope is that even in the absence of national leadership, because we do have an absence of national leadership and the guidance that it would take to put forth sweeping legislation, even in the absence of that, I do feel and am trying to be optimistic that there will be systemic change. Because one of the things that I've noticed in previous instances is that when officers are finally charged after a few nights of protest, I would feel a small sense of relief. Immediately I would think, well, where's that case going to go? I will say this time around, I processed the information that the remaining 3 officers were arrested and charged, and the murderer had his charge upgraded to second degree. I processed that, but by that point I felt we're beyond this, right? This is the bare minimum. Even a conviction wouldn't be sufficient, because in previous times I would say I want this person to be convicted. There is a need for systemic overhaul. There is this need for systemic change that extends beyond this particular case. And I know we're going to delve into what some of those changes might look like later, but that is really where my heart is, that protest and the awareness that captured this country won't end here.
Very good, very good. Good opening statement. Minister Mariah.
Hello. Yeah, I just and I hope I'm not echoing, but
You're fine.
with everything, yeah, with everything going on, there was definitely like a lot of anger there, just like naturally. That's why I really didn't resort to social media immediately following the events, because I kind of just wanted to, process the information and really process everything that's going on. It's almost like every day there's something new. It's a new protest. It's a new case of police brutality. So really just finding that time just to like get away from it a little bit and kind of just process what's going on all around the country. But I definitely, as a millennial woman, I feel that anger, not just about the events that have recently taken place, even though these are finally coming to the light, but just having to live through it. Just experience that police brutality, experience racism and being profiled, even in like the corporate world and even through the educational system, living through it. I feel like with the events that are happening now, it's very disheartening seeing that it actually took riots all over the world for them to finally come to a decision of, hey, this is an emergency. This is inequality. It took all of that for them to finally come to a decision. It's definitely disheartening. But at the same time, I'm very excited that it's getting international attention. I'm excited that even though, the doctor said, even though our president, he is absent at this moment and he isn't really being hands-on with the process of everything going on, but we do have other countries that are really coming together to see this thing work out. So I'm just praying, I'm hoping and believing that with everything that's going on now, that we'll just come together and find ways to really resolve it, from engaging with other cultures, engaging with other races, and then so forth, dealing with the educational system, systematic racism within the city. So I'm really just encouraged that this is going in a good direction, even though it's hard and it's a lot to process with everything going on. I'm definitely excited that it's finally getting attention and that it's not just our country, it's all over the world.
Yes, very good, very good. Miss Kiana.
Yeah, it sounds like we're all feeling similar. The words I chose is I'm a mix between dumbfounded and hopeful. I'm dumbfounded, one, that this is still happening in 2020. There's no way when I was in middle school learning about this in my textbook that I would be participating as an adult. And so that just blows my mind and makes me angry, like Mariah shared, and a whole host of other emotions that I've been going through over the past few weeks. I'm also dumbfounded at the response now. I don't understand why all of a sudden so many people are on board, but I celebrate that. And so I'm dumbfounded by the fact that it took this for people of all races and backgrounds to finally get on board and say, okay, yeah, we need to change things. But I am hopeful, and I really believe that God is moving. And so I think that's where my hope lies the most, is just feeling, okay, it took longer than I would have liked, but it's moving in the right direction. And when God is moving, there's nothing that can stop it. So that's exciting for me.
Awesome, awesome. Miss Trishanda.
So right now, is it echoing?
You're fine.
Okay. So just to echo a few things that the other women on the call have mentioned, I am between exhausted and hopeful. Exhausted in the sense, some of the things that Kiana brought up, I don't understand why it took this, while it took until this moment for everyone to be on board, to have their support. This week, it has been overwhelming because you're receiving so many messages from friends, family, your white friends and non-PO, and other POC allies. And everyone's asking you all of these questions, and I just feel burnt out because I feel like we've had to carry this burden for so long. We've been protesting for so long. But the way that people have shown up it does make me hopeful because it's a new group of people that are now in this movement with us, wanting policy changes, wanting hearts to be changed, especially the church. I feel like I've never seen this kind of response in churches, and that made me hopeful because now it was a conversation that needed to be addressed. And so my hope is today, like, we continue to have this conversation, but that it's a new group of people that are willing to talk about these hard things and people willing to get uncomfortable.
Very good, very good. Torian, you have a question for us or a thought?
Yeah, one of my thoughts were I heard Kiana say that she was dumbfounded, and I heard that Dr. Janice said something about the 1968 riots and what was happening after the death of Martin Luther King. One thing I wanted to kind of ask or harp on, is it surprising that the same things that are happening then are happening or had happened then are happening now? Or did you think that we made greater leaps? And two, it seemed like when Trayvon Martin had died, it seemed like the people really protest and we had a sense of unity. The Black Lives Matter group had finally emerged. So I guess my question is this something that if they do or don't get convicted, will protesting continue to happen? Should it happen? And will it happen?
Well, in terms of whether or not I'm surprised, honestly, I'm not terribly surprised, unfortunately, that this keeps happening, in part because since 1619, that is when slaves were stolen and brought here to the Americas, we've never had a coming to terms nationally with the sin of slavery and Jim Crow and overall institutionalized racism. Some places have made efforts, imperfectly as they may have been, to deal with that. For example, South Africa had a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, right? We've never had something like this. Discussions about reparations are quickly tamped down. They're kind of a marginal, or it's a kind of a marginal conversation. And until there's a recognition that this is a problem and that there are real lasting consequences, it's really difficult to come to terms with that. I sometimes hear people say that things are getting better because, older racist people, they're going to die, and, the people who are left are young. I teach college students, right? And there are a diversity of perspectives among college students. Just this week, I've, seen a couple of news stories about students who've had their college admissions rescinded because they were unimaginably mocking the manner in which George Floyd died and posting it on TikTok for laughs. And until we continue to see that, and until we continue to see limited repercussions, and I am glad to see that there are more harsh repercussions, it's going to keep happening. I have young children. I don't want them to see this. I don't want them to have to, be protesting in 20 years. But until we have a coming to terms nationally with the problems associated with racism, and more specifically, the problems associated with the structure of policing in this country, unfortunately, it may happen again.
Anyone else want to jump on that?
I'm torn. I will say, based on the education that I was given in school, yes, I'm surprised. Since then, I've been relearning American history, and the cards have been intentionally stacking this way for a while. So in that sense, I'm not surprised that this still happened in 2020. But I think there's a piece of me that's just like, no, we shouldn't be fighting the same issue 50, 60 years later. It just doesn't make sense. But surprised, no.
Shonda?
And I'll add, I'm not surprised because similar to what Janine was saying, is that I saw people saying this week, it's more, they thought, when they thought it to be more of a generational thing, and they're realizing that, no, it's something that is passed down. It's just because, maybe someone in your family, they told you these things. If that spirit or if that, that dialogue is moved down from the next person, it's never corrected. You can't just put band-aids on these things and just say, oh, you shouldn't say that. It's actually telling them why this wrong, like why this thinking is wrong, and why it is that why we're stuck in these certain circumstances as a Black community. And so I think even for us as Black people, understanding the power that we have in terms of voting, that's very important, because until this week, I was having conversations with people that never vote. They just think of it more so as, well, the popular vote doesn't count. They only look at like us voting for a president and not looking at city officials that you could put in office, your mayors, governors. And so that's one of the things too, I think that we need to make sure that we're educating ourselves.
Very good. Now I want you to talk about this. I saw on one of your Facebook posts you were going in. Although you were raised in Japan, born in America, raised in Japan, but you also have some Latina background in you as well. I recently found out that I am also Cubano. I just learned that my grandmother has comes from Cuba. Didn't even know that. I just learned that recently. So I guess I'm a Afro Latino. Didn't even know it, but I'm Black. But anyway, so tell us, share what you said today, or was it yesterday, regarding our brothers and sisters who are Latino, and in regards to this current crisis in America.
So one of the posts that I shared, it was calling out people in my family and calling out my Latino friends. And like I said, in terms of, people are going to be uncomfortable, but I'm at a point where there's no time to be nice anymore. You have to call it as it is. And some people, they think that by being Latino, but I said it's really passing. So there are people in my family and there's other people that are Latino, they have fair skin. And so because they don't look at it as that they can be targeted, they don't think that this is an issue that they should talk about. But it is in fact brown people as well that are Dominican or other within the Hispanic or Latino community that are targeted just as well. The police don't know you, what your race is when they see you out there. And so I just felt like when we're out here protesting, the Latino community, just like the Asian community, everyone should be out here because they're still benefiting off of the civil rights movement. There's policies that were put in place that actually protect all of us to be looked at as equal, to at least have certain rights. So for me, it was really heartbreaking to see like some of the comments online where, some people, again, if you're not going to protest, I'm not antagonizing you or coming after you for that. You have that right. But if you're not speaking out or using language such as all lives matter, or, that's just not acceptable. And so I had to say something.
Yeah, very good. Kiana, you've been in this movement now that you're thrusting us in here in Charlotte. And it's a great movement, great organizations doing some great things, but you're part of one in particular, It Ends Now. What has your experience been with people who aren't from the same, people who are not people of color? What has that been like, organizing with them and engaging them?
Well, so the most common feedback I get about Sunday is that people were surprised at how many white people were out there. We gathered over 3,000 people, and probably close to half were white. And so that was extremely encouraging. I think there's definitely a lot of people in my circle and my network who have a ways to go. And the It Ends Now movement is trying to be understanding of the journey, recognizing that there are people who are willing to start this journey now who would not have been willing to even just a year ago. So we're trying to make sure that we provide resources. But so far, there's been a lot of support. I think because I've been so busy with It Ends Now, I haven't had a chance to read a ton of my personal social media posts. And I was reading through one just before this call and saw somebody saying all lives matter and defending all these different just awful reasons for not getting behind Black Lives Matter. And so I think similar to Treshonda, I'm a little discouraged because I still see that it exists, but I'm encouraged by the fact that there are people who are willing to get in now, get in this fight now, who would not have been before. And there's a lot of resources for those people. There's books written by white people that I can push to people who are just getting started. And so, so far I'm encouraged. And I know that we'll have to continue to fight against some of the people that are not on board, but you can't please everybody. So
Right.
I'm okay with it.
Now, I taught freshman class the human experience, and I did that for a few years. And in that class, we went through a plethora of reading. It was a humanities type class and writing class, and I was able to take the students to like the movie 12 Years a Slave, and I saw them cover their eyes and they couldn't handle it, and how overwhelmingly they were just taken aback by the experience of 12 Years a Slave. And we would have the discussions about slavery and the civil rights movement, and I just really challenged their sensitivities. So, Dr. Janice, as a professor, and what you teach, I mean, you heard what Treshonda says, you hear what Kiana has said. What has been your experience? And you kind of mentioned it earlier, but what has been your experience as a professor? And really, have you had personal interactions where you felt as though they're just not getting it?
Right. And, as a professor, you go in knowing that there are going to be students who have a perspective that is pretty different from your own. So I teach criminal justice classes. And so because of that, I have some students who, have parents who are in law enforcement and who themselves plan to be in law enforcement. And they are, and I see their laptops, and some of them have stickers with, the thin blue line. And so I kind of get a sense of that perspective that they're coming in. And I think, if you go into the classroom thinking, I need them to, leave this class thinking the way that I think, you're going to be really frustrated. My goal is for them to have a different perspective. So, last fall in my criminal law class, early on, I screened portions of When They See Us, the multi-part series by Ava DuVernay, and I wanted students to see what a miscarriage of justice looks like. And the following week, I actually had one of the exonerated five, or we as a university had one of the exonerated five come to give a talk on campus, Kevin Richardson. And hearing from him, it's seeing on the screen, but then hearing from him what it feels like when the criminal justice system fails, when you are brutalized. He at the time was the youngest, and he was brutalized by law enforcement before he was detained. I think for students makes it much more real. And so even when I hear perspectives that are different from my own, I'm not going to lie, I'm human. I have to kind of take a deep breath. But I think of my teaching as a part of my ministry. and think that by me being able to convey to students the imperfections in our criminal justice system, how they can be agents of change within our criminal justice system, I can release that and recognize that even though some students may go on and not internalize that, I know that many of them will. And I get to read their papers that, you know, they didn't realize that some of these perceptions were wrong, right? Some of them, I had one student who said, you know, immigrants cause crime. And, you know, I have no problem saying, actually, this is in fact not the case. Immigrant communities, even those who are not here legally, commit crime at a lower rate than those who are legally born. Because think about it, right? If you are not documented, you don't want to draw attention to yourself.
Right.
It's like, oh, that makes sense. And so I think being able to dispel misconceptions about the perfections of law enforcement, because they are not perfect, as well as their own blind spots, for me is a challenge, but also a highlight when it comes to educating young people.
Okay, very good. Tony, you have a question for the ladies?
Yes, I do. I know we kind of talked about um, just the misguidance of saying when Black Lives Matter, all lives matter, and the whole frustration around that, and people not understanding the message. They thinking that we're kind of leaving out that every other race matters as well, and we're not. But another thing that kind of came up was the idea of being silent. Does that automatically mean that you're taking the side of the oppressor or taking the side of racism just because someone hasn't verbally come out and said a thing? So one of the things I want to talk is the idea of some of your friends that are silent. What does that mean? Because I've had a couple people who are white, who are my friends, who I've had respect for, come and ask me, how do I support you? So you have some that are not wanting to be silent, but just don't know how to respond. So I want how to silent and how to respond. What are the right ways to respond if you're the other race?
I can go. I honestly hate that question. I hate when I'm asked that question by white people, and it just, I don't understand how when you watch a human get treated unjustly and murdered too early that you wouldn't know how to respond. I don't understand how you don't just know how to say, that's wrong, that should change. Whatever allowed that to happen needs to stop. And so I think if that is a truly genuine question and for some reason someone really doesn't know how to respond, I would say start there. Just acknowledge that it's wrong and ask for change. That's all that we're asking for as Black people, is that the systems change so that we're not brutalized and murdered in astronomical proportions. So someone here in Charlotte named Lucretia Berry, she said to me, and this has resonated with me since she said it, she said, even just one drop can make a ripple. And that seems to resonate with some of the people that she teaches. It's just, you just say one thing to one person, that one person might go and talk to someone else, and who knows how far that ripple could go. So
yeah. She must be my cousin. I don't know. I'm just.
She might be.
Someone else want to jump on that question?
I'll jump in. So in terms of, them asking like what it is that they can do, it took a lot of grace from me this week, because like Kiana, I didn't understand either. I thought it almost felt like it's a rhetorical question, because if a child comes up to you and were to ask that, I would hope that you would know how to respond in love, like, and just thinking that this is definitely inhumane, but having that conversation with your family members, I think is very important, and acknowledging like what that is. And you can't sugarcoat these things, because the police officers, they have no problem being, whether they know they're being filmed or not, they have no problem brutally attacking people.
Right.
So I'm not going to go into detail with that, but there's so many resources out here in terms of if people, they are trying to educate themselves. I really appreciate those who, the organizations, and I've seen also allies putting these lists together and sharing that with your friends and their family members. And I think that's what people need to look at that, and knowing as well, like if you're not out here protesting. So I'm going to go back. You mentioned being silent. So for me, I feel as if you're being silent, you are on the side of the oppressor. We have had to speak out so much. And again, it's like that burden, like I'm exhausted. I'm tired. I'm still going to go out here and I'm going to still do my part and protest and still talk about the issue. But the thing is that this also starts with them. Like we can't be alone in this fight. And so if you're willing to not talk to someone about it and educate yourself, then yes, you have aligned yourself on the side of oppression.
Yeah. Before you answer that, Janice, I want to take a different direction. We've asked everyone this question here. And I think that we talked earlier about the protests and the uprising. And we thought, you said it shouldn't end because the 4 officers were arrested. And it shouldn't end if there is a conviction. But there seems to be some results because people are having these uprising, right? But do you think if it is the civil unrest, is it justifiable right now?
I think it is. And I think, as a Christian, just speaking, to the faith community, some people have definitely wrestled with that, right? And when I say civil unrest, I think it's really clear that people unpack what that is. Many, in terms of the language, what I've noticed is people will latch on to the element that is most egregious to them and use that to paint with a broad brush everyone. So if they are against Black Lives Matter, if they do not believe that Black Lives Matter, they're going to point to looters and say, see, this is why these protests are wrong. There are protests, there are riots, and riots are not irrational actions. When people riot, it's because there is a specific problematic issue that they're directing their anger towards. And then there are looters, people who are just taking advantage of what the other groups of people are doing, whether they're peaceful protesters or even people who are rioting over a specific cause or a set of issues and deciding, well, that's an opportunity for economic gain. And as we've seen, many times those people in that last category are not even from the community, right? They're people from outside communities. So that being said, civil unrest is a part of the fabric of the United States of America. Anyone who says, these people, should just protest peacefully are oftentimes the same people who in a month from now, less than a month from now, will happily celebrate the 4th of July. Whether they realize it or not, I don't know if it's cognitive dissonance, but independence was gained through violent civil unrest, right? And we celebrate that as a country, recognizing that that was necessary for independence, and we are thankful for that happening. We celebrate the civil rights movement. We've sanitized it, we've cleaned it up a lot, but I was listening to data about a public poll, how Americans perceive these current protests. These protests today are more widely accepted than the civil rights movement was in the 60s. And we love to say the civil rights movement was wonderful. People hated, by and large, the civil rights movement. Dr. King was one of the most hated men in America. 75% of Americans had an unfavorable view of him. And so when we protest to change actions that are based on unjust laws, our response of civil unrest, I do believe, is definitely justifiable.
Anybody else want to tackle that question? Let me tell you this. So, I saw on social media today that they had a map of Africa and they had the different sections of countries where people are pulling, or countries outside of African countries are going in there and looting the diamonds, the oil, the natural gas, and the like. Like we are the least amount of looters as far as those individuals going into department stores and other stores. And then I saw someone's response to that and saying that, well, shoot, black people were loot. I mean, we were looted from Africa and brought here as well. And so looting actually has been the tradition or the culture of America. But also you mentioned protests. And going back as far as the Boston Tea Party, we were founded in 1773 in the great city of Boston. They actually had a riot, and it was their own merchandise and products that they threw into the water. They were looting then. And so protests, riots, and looting are part of the fabric of America, because those in power sometimes, majority of the time, only understand the same measures they use against us, which are sometimes disruptive and sometimes not with the, it's hard to tell somebody how to fight you because, in fights, who makes the rules? And so I just think that it is justifiable. But I want to go to this question here because it leads to part of the discussion. Do you even think that not just this one officer, do you think that all four of the officers will get convicted? And then why or why not?
Man, you asked this on the call on Sunday. And
yes.
I've just been thinking about it since, hearing everyone's feedback and some of the ideas, and I hope so. But I think another part of me hopes not, because if he is convicted, if they're actually convicted, what if things calm down? Some of you have talked about examples in the past in our history, even going back to Trayvon Martin, talking about how people protested and things happened, and George Zimmerman wasn't even convicted, and we still ended up dying down for some reason. We stopped marching, we stopped demanding change, and so I think the way our system is built, they're not going to get convicted anyway. And part of me says, oh, good, maybe America will stay angry enough to actually make change happen. And please don't hear me say that I do not want justice for George Floyd. That is not what I'm saying by saying that perhaps them not getting convicted could be good for this movement. I certainly want justice. And I think Dr. Denise said this earlier. I don't know what would be justice for George. That murder was so brutal and so insensitive and just so awful. He might need to be out in the general public and let us deal with it.
Zimmerman was locked up last weekend in Atlanta for DUI, and I think he came out okay. But anyway, somebody else want to take on that same question here. Brittany says this: if he's convicted, I believe it's only to put us at ease, not because they think he is guilty. If you look at the video, a man had his hands in his pockets while a grown man cried out. And I think that speaks to the volume of how people feel the injustice is happening and the frustration. But other ladies here, do you think that I'm under the thought, kind of what Brittany was saying, is just to put us at ease. Do you think they will convict him just to put us at ease? Or do you think this has, you started off earlier, Dr. Denise, that this is starting to overwhelm just George Floyd, that is going beyond that? I don't know. Will the protests end? I thought the protests would end after the other three officers were arrested, but they didn't. And that's the first time that we've gotten something and it did not stop. And so, what's going on?
So I would say, yes, I do want justice for George Floyd. I want justice for Breonna Taylor, for Ahmaud Arbery. Whichever case comes first, if we actually see convictions, I would be surprised.
Mm-hmm.
I also don't know if they will be able to be convicted on those charges. I almost feel like it would be a lesser charge that they convict them on.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to continue to see people angry and out here demanding like changes. So again, it comes back to policy for me. And so until you see those changes, I honestly don't think that we'll continue to see these convictions, and that we need real accountability in these police departments.
Okay, all right. Mitchell Blue says it's a movement. It's not going to stop. Dr. Janice, what do you think?
One of the things that I shouldn't say baffled me because I wasn't surprised, but just for the sake of logistics, perplexed me a little bit was why, when they saw in Minnesota, and this is speaking specifically to officials there, what happened, right? The rioting, and I mean, the city was literally on fire. Thursday, Friday evening of last week, they didn't arrest these officers. I feel that arresting those three officers, even though I know, the Attorney General, Mr. Ellison there, I think he definitely, is intentional about what he did. I feel like the three arrests were done to quell the arrest. It was like, okay, like we need to arrest these three immediately. And what they did unwittingly is by allowing the protest to carry on day after day. Because think about it, if they had fired them immediately, which they did, and then arrested everyone a day or even 2 days later, the protest wouldn't have spread and spread and spread. But having it prolonged, people are like, wait a minute. This is in us now. If you've ever been in an argument with someone and they continue to push your buttons, after a while, even if they say, okay, my bad, it's all right, you're already riled up. You're already pushing the argument. And so I think, in fact, I do agree with the comment there that it is a movement. I want to say that Derek Chauvin will be convicted. There are major problems with our criminal justice system in its ability to hold law enforcement accountable. But I'm going to say that, but of course that is in the hands of a jury. The three other officers, I do not think that will happen. I certainly don't think it will happen for at least one of them. That is the one officer who seemed to be the lookout. There were two officers who were physically holding him. So that one officer, I don't think he'll be convicted at all. And I think that if it, especially if Derek Chauvin isn't, I was speaking to my husband jokingly, but seriously at the same time, if that verdict comes back not guilty for Derek Chauvin especially, what you will see in Minnesota and I think potentially other cities around the country will be worse than the Los Angeles riots. And I think that would be a reckoning for the United States in a serious way.
That leads us to the next question. Who wants to tackle this? If he's not convicted, if especially Chauvin, if he's not convicted, but if any of them are not convicted, what's going to happen? What's the reaction of America? What do you think?
I said this on Sunday and I'll say it again. I think we're close to a civil war. I think we're getting there. And someone on that panel made the point that we don't have the guns. And so I said, I need to get to a store and get all my all my people to get some guns because it definitely feels like Dr. Denise was saying, cities will likely be on fire, perhaps the whole country, literally and figuratively.
You know, it's important. It's something you said that they are. I went to the store the other day to buy a computer, but I went to, and then I thought I'd go around the corner and look at, see if I can get a gun, see what they had any guns for sale, just to price them. They didn't have any.
Wow. Wow.
So
That's
I just
not
want
good.
no. So I think that what you're experiencing in your thoughts is what a lot of Americans are thinking, but if you haven't gotten on it to protect yourself, it may be too late. Something to think about, America. But Torian and who hasn't spoke? Shonda first and Torian. Same question. If he's not convicted, what's going to happen in America?
I echo what Dr. Janice said. I definitely believe there will be more fires. It will escalate times 10 to me what we saw last week with the literally with people burning things down. Yeah. I felt like Ferguson was one thing, but then to see that happen again in a new way, because that was after a conviction. We haven't received a conviction. And I also know people aren't talking about how long it's going to take for them to go to trial, because that's another thing, having to wait a while to see something. That happened with Eric Garner's case. So, yeah.
We'll see. We'll see. I want to invite people who are watching to submit questions to our panel here as Torian gets prepared to answer the question. Go ahead and just submit them here online. We like to respond with what you have to say. This is it's open dialogue, and so we're not afraid to answer any questions. Make them. No question is a bad question. I tell all my students, every question is a good question. It's a safe space, although it's World Wide Web, to share your thoughts. Torian, what do you think? If he's not convicted, how will America react?
One thing that comes to mind is what Malcolm X is quoted saying about how the world is used to seeing different types of massive destruction, whether in war, those types of bomb, whether it's an economic type of bomb. But one thing that America would not be ready for is a racial bomb. America cannot handle a racial tension ignited war. And nothing would ever be the same if this conviction doesn't happen. And so with that being all of the same, my question is, if conviction isn't happening, is reparation can still be amended? It start with this. And if it doesn't start with this, is there a different type of means, an avenue that we can go to kind of get to the place that we want to go and be?
That's good. Well, that's going to lead to part of this question here. I put it this way. What should the next steps America and its leaders do to address the issues around injustice? Similar to what Torian was saying as well. This is your opportunity, ladies. What should America do? Following what Torian was just asking. If you were in charge,
Get rid of all the old white leaders that are sitting in offices right now and start elevating voices of color. Change laws, change policies. It's time to rewrite our laws, our Constitution, honestly.
wow, that's a heavy statement there. Very good. Who else was the talker? What steps? Hi, Mariah.
Hi.
You want to tackle that? You moved away for a minute. You want to tackle that question? What should the next steps be?
I think the next step, with all of the publicity that this country is getting with the events that are going on, I think the next step is to bring new leaders with different schools of thought like she said, to not get out of all the old white men or all of the people who have that same old mindset. It's obviously not working. America is on fire. So I definitely think they should introduce new leaders to Congress, new leaders and on every political level, just bringing a different thought to the table as how we should tackle this issue. I think new leaders should be the step one.
Now you say both of you said the white leaders, but is it just white folk? Oh, go ahead, Shauna. You gonna say something?
So
Then Janice after that.
I'm gonna challenge that a little bit to say
Go
that
ahead.
so with congressional Black members, I think that it's their responsibility to also help educate young leaders, like young activists, to be prepared to take on those roles. Because a lot of times we're seeing it comes to money, but in the case of 2016 and 2018, some of the members, you're seeing younger faces and people that don't have law degrees or they're doctors or engineers. Like, you're not seeing the same stories like of people coming in, like getting into those roles. And so I think that we need these local activist organizations and, again, Black leaders to take people under and mentor them so that they can take those reins, so we can have other people that are representative of their constituents. That's the biggest thing. Not people paying to go into these districts and represent people and they really don't have your interests.
Right.
Because that doesn't help either.
Janice?
First, everybody who can needs to vote. And that just echoes what you just mentioned, because, the President of the United States, the Department of Justice, there is intransigence towards criminal justice reform. It is simply not going to happen. One of the things I tell my students is national leadership is really important. I know national leader gets a lot of attention, but your daily lives, by and large, are impacted by your locally elected officials. If you have a governor's race going on in your state, if you have city council races going on in your state, the city council plays a large role in many places. Charlotte also one of being those places. Vote and pay attention to even the referendum that are on the ballot, because that's going to have an impact. Your senators, both the state as well as the federal level, these are all really important in bringing about change, because at the end of the day, like, that's where our tax dollars are going. And why does it matter? Because when you think about criminal justice reform and some of the problems that we're seeing in criminal justice reform, those things are handled by and large at the local level, right? And I know we're going to get into specific criminal justice policy initiatives, but the mayor of Minneapolis, he feels that his hands are tied since he, had certain visions of things he wanted to change, and he simply could not because of the way the system is structured in the city of Minneapolis in terms of the relationship between the mayor and law enforcement. So, vote for your elected officials at all levels. Do not sit this one out. If you have to hold your nose and vote, hold your nose and vote. But definitely need to be proactive.
Yeah, I agree. So Robin asked a question: what is the panel's position on voting? And that leads to what kind of pulls on what Dr. Janice was saying. What about this voting? I mean, we've been voting. Should we continue to vote? And I like what you said. Even if you have to hold your nose, you should vote. But what's the significance in voting right now? Before you answer that, Tuesday, or was it Tuesday they had a blackout Tuesday? Was it that blackout Tuesday? Whoever called for this blackout Tuesday didn't think about the fact that people had to vote that particular day in D.C. and Maryland and somewhere else. And we have to be more critical about what we do as relates to this movement. But what's the significance in voting right now? I know we got a presidential race, and it's going to be, well, I'll leave that alone for right now. But what you guys answer that question?
Let me say one thing before we jump to that. It's kind of on the same basis.
Go ahead.
Some of the stats I was reading about voting in the black vote is that Trump won Wisconsin by 20 and 93,000 black people did not vote.
Right.
Trump won Florida by 113,000. 379,000 blacks in Florida didn't vote. Trump won by 11 in Michigan. Trump won by 44,000, and over 500,000 didn't vote in both of those states combined. It leads me to my question. In these major cities where the majority of the elected officials are, in fact, Democrat, does the value of the black vote, is it always loyal to the Democrats after this, or are we going to vote for the best person, whether they're Democrat or Republican?
And what race you referring to?
The presidential election. Well, not the presidential election, but any city official. Is the black people, are we a Democrat? Are we loyal to the Democratic vote after this, or are we going to vote for the person who we think is best in charge, or best person in charge?
Go ahead, somebody.
I have a lot of opinions on politics, and I was trying to frame what I would say so that I wouldn't be too long. My honest answer, first, let me say I acknowledge that voting matters, and when we vote, we are controlling who gets to make laws and have a say in laws. But our voting system is broken. And so I think, a piece of me is just torn with how do we fix the system while continuing to do what matters to make sure that the right people are in place to fix the system and continue to make it better. And so I wish that people in general would just vote for the right candidate. I think we've gotten into this two-party system, and we've gotten so devoted to it that it keeps us from actually focusing on the issues that matter. There's corruption on both sides. Both sides accept money to pass laws that their constituents would not have voted for. And so there's just a lot of issues there, and a lot of those were highlighted in the Trump election. But I guess my summary is I recognize how powerful voting is, and I do not discourage anyone from voting. But I also recognize that we need change in our voting system, and we need to figure out how to make sure that we're not just voting along party lines because of a narrative we've been told.
Interesting. Shonda, I think you want to say something.
So, I'm all for voting. I think when these messages are put out there from candidates, they need to make sure they're speaking to the people, making sure they understand what those policies mean for them, and how, making sure people can relate to the policies and the language. Because I see a few of the comments here, a lot of times if the verbiage is there, it's really talking points, right? That were submitted, and we put that out there, but you have to learn how to dumb it down for people and make sure they understand. Just like, for instance, when they passed the stimulus bill, there was a lot of stuff in there. And so, of course, now everyone's going through some people, they really want to understand, they're reading it, but you have to make sure that you're actually talking to people. Like when we passed the Affordable Care Act, making sure you're not getting lost in the weeds of that. And in terms of voting, just going back to what Dr. Janice said, yes, when we have these elections, people need to understand what's at stake in terms of the mayor, the city council, your school board officials. I don't think people especially people with children, they should be voting. They should make sure that they're pushing back, asking questions, get involved, go to, those meetings that they have, especially if you're tied to your community, and you're putting in money, they're taking your tax dollars. So you have the right to ask these questions. And the reason why a lot of these candidates, they operate in a way of dysfunction or mishandling funds is because no one's checking them on it. And that's up to us, the voters.
Dr. Denise, will you chime in on the voting process? I think you started it off. So what about this voting? Now let me point out some things. I don't think there's really a choice for the presidential election. I think it's either you with one or you with the other. It amazes me that people are in the middle or trying to decide who they're going to vote for in the presidential election. I think you should pick one and go with it. But Janice, what do you think about this voting thing now?
I genuinely believe that when we vote, we are honoring the memory of our ancestors. And I say that as someone whose family, I'm from an immigrant family. But I also know that I was raised here and I am benefiting from the work and the labor and the death of civil rights leaders and those who came before. Mm-hmm. So all of that said, when it comes to the election in 2020, I remember the last election. I have some friends who are very, very, very progressive and ideologically pure to the point that they just felt like they could not, they would make what I felt were false equivalencies between the two candidates, Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. And I didn't think that was fair. In 2020, I think I'm trying to say this in a calm way, but
don't be calm.
Because you just can't do that. I understand, some people say, oh, left wing, right wing is the two sides of the same bird. That's great and wonderful. And I'm all for, pushing the movement forward and progressing. But this is not, we are in a place where we are teetering on very dangerously close to fascism. And I think when people hear that, they're like, oh my gosh, you're being like, that's a hyperbole, that's being extra. If you read what fascism is, restrictions on what the press can say or diminishing the validity of the press, mm-hmm. Arresting citizens without their constitutional rights being respected, there are a lot of things that are teetering close. There were people, in pre-Nazi Germany who are like, this Hitler guy, he's great. Like, this is not, this is ridiculous. And that's what happened. And so I really think we simply don't have an option. I think you need to vote as if you are trying to preserve democracy. And if you don't, make arrangements for what country you want to move to, because things are not going to be great. And I'm usually one of those people who are like, don't be extra, don't exaggerate. Like, America has struggled before, but they've overcome. Things are really at a tipping point here. And so I would really beseech anyone who's listening, if you really, really don't like the candidate, it's hard for me to say it because I do really want to respect people's right to vote Green Party or third party candidate, what have you. But ask yourself if you can stomach 4 more years of what we've experienced, especially in light of during a second term, a candidate or an elected official is usually just ready to let loose. Anything that they've restrained for 4 years,
right?
They're letting that out. And I really don't know how much worse it can get. So please, people, vote like your life depended on it.
All right, we'll go around the table. I have a series of questions from people on Facebook, and we're going to just, Mariah, you take this one. Will voting really help if you have elected officials that would say they are down for the cause, but fail or are slow to change policies and legislation? What do you think?
I think voting will help. Like the doctor said, I really believe that voting will help because right now, even though the system is corrupt, and even though parties can advertise what they feel the public will want to hear, or they can advertise like we're seeing some of the candidates are doing now, based on current events that are going on that they may not necessarily truly stand on. But I feel like as the general public and as the community, the best that we can do is to really educate ourselves about each candidate beyond just like the commercials or the infomercials that they're doing around the hype of election time, but really study and do research and background on the decisions that they've made prior to um, them, running for office to kind of get an idea of their thought process or kind of get an idea of, the way they tackle problems and issues within the community and just like presidential level, if they even care. Like,
Yes.
does this person even care about the community? Is this person concerned with racial inequality? Is this even, have they expressed, because we've seen based on some of our officials where they publicly expressed that they don't care about racial inequality prior to them getting into office. So I think that we should just do our on a personal level, we should do our research on each candidate before we just go out and vote and just use our voice, but we actually should try to educate ourselves on a personal level and then within the community come together. Like one of the panelists said, come together to kind of try to dumb it down for the people that are intimidated by voting. I think so many African Americans don't vote because they go to the polls and they can't understand the information that's being given to, even though it seems like it's really simple what they're saying, but a lot of African Americans, I think, are intimidated by the voting process. So just kind of coming up with some kind of ways that we can kind of bridge that gap so people can feel more comfortable making a call to action.
Very good. Now, another question along that lines, Beth Rose asks, what do you think is the biggest hurdle in getting black voters out on election day? Going on what Mariah said. Before you answer that, when you think about that, there's CNN just had released something in the last couple of hours, article talking about swing states. And what Torian was saying was that if blacks would have turned out in a few of these states, Mr. Trump would have lost. So the black vote is imperative one way or the other. I don't need to tell you which way to vote, but I'm pretty sure if you're my friend, you know how you vote. But anyway, but Fox News says in Ohio, 45%, their poll came out, 45% for Biden, 43% for Trump today, recently. Fox News poll also said Wisconsin had Biden up 49% to 40% to Trump. And Quinnipiac, I don't know, I never had pronounced that at university. In Texas, they had Trump winning by 44% and Biden 43%. If those right now, if those numbers, it's not looking really good for Mr. Trump to repeat again as president. Actually, he's actually in a losing position. It also goes on to say that no Democrat has won. The last Democrat to win Arizona was Bill Clinton in '96, but now that state is moving closer toward Democrat winning that state. And it also said that in Pennsylvania and Michigan, been long-term states that were run by Democrats, but Trump won last time. It's suggested now that he's behind in those two states. And so if the election was held today, all things remain the same. You can't really trust polls, but if election held today, Mr. Trump quite easily would lose and Mr. Biden will win. A couple of things before you let you answer that question. If Trump loses Texas and wins everything else he won in 2016, he will lose to Biden 270 to 268 electoral votes. That's important how Texas is. If Trump loses Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin and wins everything else he won in 2016, he would lose to Biden 278 to 260. If Trump loses Arizona, Michigan, and Pennsylvania and wins everything else he won in 2016, he would lose 279 to 259. So it goes on and on with these different swing states. But right now, it's not looking the best for Mr. Trump. So the question is, what do you think is the biggest hurdle in getting black voters out on election day? What's holding us back from voting? Dr. Denise, or I mean, anybody. I might take this question.
No, go ahead.
You guys are so nice.
I think excitement, quite frankly, because I think it's pretty clear that despite what he says, he is not in the interest, and he repeatedly affirms that. Today, he used the recent economic job report, which was better than had been projected, to declare that he was, demonstrating his ability to help the Black community, and that George Floyd was smiling down and was happy. Who, this is, of course, the same George Floyd who was killed and murdered at the hands of a law enforcement officer. So he proves every day to, I think, the African American community, and I think to people who are engaged in thinking about progress beyond the African American community, that he is not for us. That being said, I don't think that the presumptive Democratic nominee, Joe Biden, is an exciting candidate for many African Americans. The closest thing about him that is exciting is the fact that, of course, he was the vice president to President Obama. So in terms of that hurdle, I think that campaign really needs to be strategic in the selection of a vice presidential candidate, someone who will bring energy and excitement when it comes to bringing African American voters to the poll, because I think that is the biggest gap. Those folks who are going to vote for Donald Trump, they are out there. I mean, I don't see people with stickers plastered all over their car. Last election, I didn't see Hillary Clinton stickers everywhere, but folks who love Trump, I mean, they have yard signs and they are for him. And so I think there really needs to be an enthusiasm. Someone young-ish, but even outside of age, progressive and willing to speak about things like systemic racism and police brutality, because I don't know that Biden is as eloquent in speaking about those issues as he could be.
Shonda.
And to piggyback off of Dr. Janice, I agree. And he needs to really pick a great VP candidate, because that was one of the biggest issues last time in the presidential election with Hillary Clinton when she picked Tim Kaine. One of the things, a few things that I think are hurdles for getting Black voters out on election day. First, it's the primary. It's awareness and education on going out first during the primary season and voting, because if you are able to have some of these incumbent members, people that have been there for a long time, I mean, Bear, you already know which side I'm on, but if you're able to get some of these people out who actually are supporting the president, that's one thing. That's one less thing that you have to worry about in terms of support for him. It's also access. So a lot of the laws that are set up, again, because of the Voting Rights Act, and we continuously go to the Supreme Court, or there's cases that are brought to the state Supreme Court every few years in terms of redlining and these barriers that they put in place to take away the opportunities for you to have early voting. Those are things that are actually hurting the Black community, because a lot of times people they don't have it in them where they can stand in line all day on Tuesday because the lines are so long. And so that is one of the reasons why we need the access to be able to do mail-in ballots in some states. That they don't have that in every state. The ability for people to get there. So I know a lot of churches, there's people that are carpool on election day, but those are some of the things that I think it's a matter of time. And then people understanding what that means, like to give up their time and knowing that it will be worth it to stand there. And that's, again, if you're able to take that time off from your job, because every district or, polling location is different. And I would also then say it's the the misinformation that's put out there in terms of the races that are happening, the candidates that are running. People you're contacted within September to November. You're contacted by so many different people, for local, state, and the presidential elections, and then I would think it becomes overwhelming for people.
Excellent. I'm going to change this a little bit. Somebody has to tackle this. Kiana and then Torian, what do you think? And we'll go around the room. Do you think America's ready for a black woman as VP?
A black woman?
Yes. People have been urging for these black women, variety of black women, to be the VP candidate for Mr. Biden. Is America ready?
I hate to say this on a call with black women.
It's okay.
No, I don't think America is ready for that. I still have experiences in just regular corporate America where people can't even have a black female boss. So to have a black female vice president, I can't see it, but some people call me a cynic, so maybe it's my cynicism coming out, but I don't think so.
Torian, what do you think?
I think.
Be bold and courageous, brother. Be bold and courageous.
Yeah, this is Tyler. I think, man, we kind of already had close to black VP when we had Michelle in office. I think that was pretty close to a woman VP / president. Shout out to it. But I don't think so much. The question is America ready for a black woman VP? I would say probably not. I don't even know if America's ready for a woman VP of any color yet. I don't think that things have changed that much to where even the logistics is accepting a woman as a vice president, let alone a president. But I do think that after the dust settles, if it settles with everything that's happened around the George Floyd, I think a trajectory of a high demand flip, meaning that I think people will start looking for more answers and accepting the idea that a black woman could be VP. I think that after this, I know if Michelle Obama ran right now, she would definitely have my vote. Someone on that level, I think she's a better candidate than Joe Biden. She would have definitely better than 45. But is it ready? I don't think it is ready, but I think that this is a pivotal moment in time where the change could happen.
Okay, all right. Mariah, what do you think? And then we'll go to Janice, and then I'll let Shonda jump in.
I honestly think it's possible. And I'm just going to piggyback on what Torian said. With Michelle Obama being the wife of President Obama, she made a lot of decisions, and she was very hands-on within the community. She still is. Her and her husband is still very hands-on within the community. So I'm not really sure if the country is ready to have a African-American vice president woman, but I definitely think that we're going in that direction just by seeing Michelle Obama being more present within the community and having so much effect in the White House during President Obama's administration. So I definitely feel like with everything going on and everybody, like he said, looking for answers, like I feel like with all the events going on, people are using this kind of like as a catalyst to move forward into the future, to kind of consider other options as opposed to how we've had it before. More people that are traditional, maybe they were more traditional, but with all of this going on with the racial inequality, I think people are thinking different now. I think people are, they're being more open to, we have to find other ways to deal with our issues than how it is now. So I don't know if they're ready for it now, but I definitely feel like with everything going on, it's opening a lot of eyes and it's opening a lot of people's hearts and ears to what's going on in our government.
Okay. Dr. Janice.
I mean, I remember when Barack Obama announced his candidacy. And I remember I was in graduate school. We were all in our, early 20s. And I remember a friend of mine, she was like, I mean, he's not, we were just kind of like, this is a pie in the sky. It just seemed so unlikely
Right.
in 2007, right? And then it became reality. I honestly feel maybe this is a little, and I can't be quite cynical, but I think this is a little bit of my optimism. The possibility of Barack Obama becoming president felt much larger to me at that time in 2007 when he announced his candidacy than the possibility of a Black woman becoming a VP right now. Because that guy, I mean, it's just like you couldn't fathom the country voting a Black man into the White House at that in 2007, the day he announced his candidacy in Illinois. Whereas now that the president still would fit the historical boxes that presidents have always come from. And I think also if a Black woman is selected, she has to be progressive. I'm at the point where I'm like, if this election is lost, I don't want it to be, well, shoulda, coulda, woulda. It needs to be put someone on the ballot who did have the energy or did bring young people out. Because if young people had voted in the last election the way they had for Obama, completely different story, right? Joe Biden is not going to excite young people. He just isn't, right? And so having someone who is progressive, and if I were to throw some names out there, as much as I love Michelle Obama, she has said repeatedly she does not want to go near the White House. She is done.
Well, she's not going to do it. Right.
Done. And she has said it, and I believe her. Of course, names that have been thrown around, Stacey Abrams, who might have been the governor of Georgia had it not been for the fact that the current governor was stole it, right? Some have brought up Keisha Lance Bottom, the mayor of Atlanta. Kamala Harris is kind of a tricky pick because many have criticized her for her criminal justice issues, and with what's going on now, I don't know that would be the best pick, but I think there are definitely qualified Black women, and there are qualified non-Black women. My only concern is the other option, non-Black women options, may also run into the same issues of lacking the ability to really bring enthusiasm to the ballot.
Okay. Sean, did you want to jump on this?
Yes, so I'll add in. I'm very optimistic, but again, going back to what Dr. Denise said, I remember in 2007 when Barack Obama was first starting to put it out there, like going out, talking to potential voters. And a lot of people really doubted that he would go far. I'm a believer that there can be a female vice president. And I see someone asked, why would the VP race matter? It's only because Biden has said that he vows to pick a female Black woman VP candidate. So that's why we're talking about Black females. I see that in the comments. But in terms of people, I think there are some exciting candidates. So I would say even Val Demings, she has a really great record. Also, the mayor of Atlanta, Stacey Abrams, those are a few. So I want to remain optimistic.
Okay. Now, I would love for Stacey Abrams to get it. Stacey was president of Spelman, my favorite university in the world, favorite college in the world, Spelman College. She was SGA president when I was SGA president down the street around the corner at Morris Brown College. And so she's a friend of mine going back years. And I worked with Susan Rice at State Department. She was over the Africa Bureau. and I worked on the Africa desk, one African desk in my department. And I think that, I believe out of those are the two leading candidates. I think that's my piece on it. But we'll see. Is America ready? I mean, I don't know. That's a thought. I don't know. That's the conversation of today. And Mr. Biden put himself in a position where it's going to be a female because he said it was going to be a female. And I know there's a large contingency within America that is pushing for an African American woman to be the vice presidential candidate. And the question was asked why the VP discussion is so real. It's because one reason also is the fact that Mr. Biden is not 60. He is older. And so that being the case, there's a good chance for the next 4 to 8 years that vice presidential candidate will become the next president of the United States of America if Mr. Biden wins. And so you're not necessarily voting for the vice presidential candidate. You're possibly voting for and supporting the next president of the United States after Mr. Biden. So that's why it's relevant to have that type of discussion today. And there's some other questions here, but we're late into our day. So I'm going to ask this one, and then after we ask this question here, I want everybody to, this is from the audience, to think about your closing thoughts. And we'll do this one really quickly. If anybody has any questions who are watching, please submit them now, and we'll just hit all the questions we can from the panel. But one question is, what are the panel's thoughts on mail-in ballots, and do you think it's a potential of fraud? Well, I guess it's a potential chance of fraud. What do you guys think? I think I guess he's out of Utah. The senator of Utah said that mail-in ballots is what they're going to do in Utah. What are your thoughts?
So I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I know that is one of the things that they use to antagonize voters and bring that as an issue. But it's a very small percentage that's shown in every election for potential voter fraud. So I don't believe. I mean, I trust the numbers. Like, since they've ran the reports and they've done the investigation, I am a proponent of mail-in ballots because of the issues that I brought up earlier in terms of there being barriers for people to actually go out and vote. And I think that if we are able to condition people to turn in mail-in ballots, maybe we would have greater participation. I mean, this year, in fact, they did try, and it wasn't as successful during the primary. I think it was during one of the caucuses, using the computers, like the tech, like going that route. But there's things that we're actually going to have to try out first instead of saying, no, it doesn't work.
Okay. Well, somebody else tackle that. This is what Brittany says. It is fraud. In Florida, they call elections before even counting them. There needs to be a better system. But 46 states actually have a mail-in system in place. 24 of those states are Democrat, and 22 of those states are Republican. And so it seems to be a bipartisan practice of mailing in ballots. And it goes all the way back, according to MIT, it goes back to, I just had it here. It goes back to the Civil War. So we've been voting by mail since the Civil War. And that's a long time ago. So anyway, what do you think? Oh, I changed the wrong question there. About mail-in votes. We're talking about mail-in ballots.
I'll tackle that.
Yes.
I think it could be a potential of fraud. Any way we do the ballots, because we've seen over the last few years that there has been fraud within counting the ballots. So I think as far as the system is corrupt, and it could be fraud on any level. But I definitely think the mail-in ballots are more convenient for the voters. I think that it will help African American voters specifically because it'll allow them to feel less intimidated with the voting process as far as using their voice and it being convenient, and some people still having to go to work and still having their careers. within that election period. So I think it's very convenient doing the mail-in ballots, and I think fraud can be found anywhere where humans are involved. So I think it's a great introduction to just try it, and you know, I think we should try it and make it more convenient for the voters. That way, we get at least more action as opposed to none at all.
Okay, very good, very good. We're gonna move on to this question here. I'm going to who hasn't spoken, Dr. Denise or Kiana. The question is, what policies should American leaders implement going into the November election and into the new year? This builds off of the movement that we're in right now. We're still dealing with some injustices in America, dealing with Sister Brianna, who really hasn't seen justice for her killing yet. It's taken some time with the current crisis that we're talking about with Brother Floyd. But what are some of the, you're in criminal justice, Dr. Janice. That's your practice, was it criminal justice or was it? Yes. So what are some of the policies coming into this new November election and in January when we have a new president?
So the first thing that that I'm going to be watching, and right now there's a case before the Supreme Court, and that focuses on qualified immunity, and that's a term that I think a lot of people have been hearing recently, just within the past week. So one of the reasons why it's so difficult to hold law enforcement accountable, and also one of the reasons why many law enforcement abuse their power, unfortunately, is because qualified immunity basically says that you cannot be sued as a public official. And it really is designed to protect all civil servants, all individuals who work for local governments. But for law enforcement specifically, the only reason they can be the only reason they can be sued individually. Mind you, victims' family have sued the city for millions of dollars, but you can't sue police officers individually unless there is proof that they have violated constitutional rights. And you think that would be easy to prove. You've seen someone, like what we just saw with Derek Chauvin, what we saw with Breonna Taylor, that would be easy to prove, but it is extremely difficult to prove. And so I would really like to see that struck down by the Supreme Court, but there's no way to tell. Another important change, and I'm going to really focus in on the criminal justice system, is federal legislation regarding police reform. A lot of police reform will happen at the state level, but there really needs to be reform about the abuse of power of law enforcement, when officers can be fired. It's really, really hard to fire police officers, and the extent to which having to keep officers who have violated civil rights is a violation of the civil rights of the broader public. So hopefully that's something that can be tackled in the coming months, brought up into the campaign. And at this point, I'm sure the Biden campaign will bring up those things because they kind of have to now. And hopefully he is elected and then those changes are implemented.
Very good, very good. Someone else.
I see a public comment asking Dr. Janice a question. I feel like there's no way I can give an idea about what policies would be good following a professor of criminal justice. There's just no way I can give a better answer. So I'm gonna lean on Dr. Janice here.
Okay, all right.
Someone asked, what would be the alternative to holding public servants, mainly police officers, accountable?
So there have been a number of, I think, pretty viable recommendations. So I think a really important thing to do is think about where our funding is. You may have heard of defunding the police or seen that hashtag over the past week. Cities, localities, allocate a pretty significant amount of money to local police departments. And what that does is strips funds and resources away from schools and resources, a lot of these underlying issues within, especially disadvantaged communities and communities of color that are related to factors that bring about crime. And when we say defunding police, it doesn't mean we're firing law enforcement officers. What it means is that we're not investing millions and millions of dollars into things like tactical gear, because police officers don't need to be armed and outfitted in the way that military needs to be outfitted. And that's where that comes from. You know, we've seen over the past week some of the tactical gear that officers have, the riot gear. And that's not in other countries. So it's not like it's a requirement. It's one thing if you have a small tactical unit that is deployed for extreme circumstances, but every single major city having that, that's an extreme expense. I think another alternative in terms of holding public servants accountable, is really reevaluating the power of police union contracts. I think, police officers don't get paid that much money when they first join the force, but one of the incentives around the country is the fact that they're going to receive a pension and that they have a union, and the police unions are really, really strong. But they're so strong that it, like I mentioned, can be really difficult to fire officers like Derek Chauvin. And honestly, if you are, head of your police union, if you are a police chief, you should want officers like that to be fired offhand, because that contaminates the perception. I mean, if that officer had been fired, I can't imagine right now if you were to go to, the president of the police union in Minneapolis and say, if you could go back in time and have that officer fired, would you do that? Or would you keep that officer on the force and have everything that's happening now? I have a hard time believing they would be, yeah, we sure would have all these protests and riots. That would be worth it. I was listening to an interview with the mayor of Minneapolis, Mr. Frey, 2 nights ago, and he was saying that he has a pretty poor relationship with the president of the police union, and he, as a mayor, does not have the power to fire a police officer. And I think that needs to change. I think there needs to be civilian oversight, a civilian board that investigates instances of police brutality, because when police are investigating their own, surprise, they're going to be sympathetic, right? Just as when we look at some teachers in some states like New York City, where I'm from, have really powerful unions, but you don't see the teachers union coming to the aid of a teacher who's charged with child molestation. They're not saying, no, we need to keep them, they're good, they're fired. And I think there needs to be a similar approach to corrupt police officers within states as well.
Very good. Very good. Well, we've come down to our last few minutes here, so I'll let you guys go around and say whatever you want to say as your closing thoughts. I want to thank you now in advance, and then I'll have a closing thought at the end of this. But to put things in perspective, we want to make certain that America understands that it's a new day, and I welcome you to go hard in your last statement, or just what's your lasting memory you want people to know from this conversation today? Who wants to go first? Who wants to be the first one to go into it? I'm gonna sit up close on this one because I want to hear what you have to say.
I can go first.
Go ahead.
I'm not gonna go hard, so sorry to disappoint. But the thing that was weighing on my mind, we talked a lot about politics today, and I'm just reminded that as Christians, our hope is not in the world and the political leaders produced by the world. Our hope is in the Lord. And so I want to, and I know that perhaps not everybody that's watching is Christian, but I am. And I just really feel like if we as Christians would be more like Christ, things would change. And so that's my closing thought. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for coming. And keep doing the work what you're doing with It Ends Now. I think that's one of the most important movements taking place in the great city of Charlotte, if not North Carolina, if not the Carolinas. Who's next? Okay, I'm in college. I'm in my class. All right. So, Treshonda.
So the last thing, or a few things I would like to say is, first, I want everyone to feel I want people to feel hopeful and encouraged, because this is going to be, it's going to be a marathon. This isn't something that's going to happen overnight,
Right.
but we all have to be united right now in order for changes to come. So especially, this is an election year. So I want people to make sure that they are registered to vote. You need to ask other people in your families if they're registered to vote. If you're going out to protest, one of the things I will be doing while I'm out there, I have voting forms. I can pull it up on my phone, depending on, how you choose to protest. But that is one of the biggest things right now, is that we need to make sure that we are registered to vote. If you live in Georgia, you need to make sure you vote next week on June 9th. The other thing is, as believers, again, like what Keanu was saying, is that we need to be praying. One of the things is we need to be praying for our leaders and for the people in our community, for our friends, family members' hearts to change, because it does go a long way having those conversations, and that racism can be pulled out from the root.
Mariah, please. Did we lose Mariah? Okay. Janice, Dr. Janice.
Well, I would say, and I've been thinking about this and have been in this space personally, is thinking about how I can be, how can I can impact the faith community. Living here in Charlotte, many people, North Carolina now is a swing state. That's not something we would have said 15 years ago, but it is a swing state. But I know many people who are really conservative, and having lived in other states, Massachusetts, New York, that's something I've kind of adjusted to. And while I've struggled with understanding that perspective, I've also, especially this time around, have tried to listen and be prayerful, and also to at least engage in a conversation, to the extent that I believe that you can follow Christ, love him, love his ways. But it's difficult to also say that you love your brothers and sisters who are Black, or to even feel offended by the term Black Lives Matter because it doesn't align with your political views, and to really unpack that. That is hard, and it is exhausting, and I'm sure many of you are and have been exhausted this week, just at an emotional level, and I've definitely found myself there. And I feel like at this point, one of the few places and spaces in which I'm willing to extend myself is within that particular community of faith, because I know that some people are willing to listen and to understand. And the last thing I guess I'll say is that there's a song by Sweet Honey and the Rock called Ella Song. It's a song written after, in honor of Ella J. Baker. And they say, "We who believe in freedom shall not rest." And whatever your walk is, whatever your protest is, if it is literally protesting on the street or in your classroom, in the courtroom, in your church, whatever that space is, be diligent in that, educating young people, because you are making a change. Even if you can't see the flower, you are planting a seed, and that will have an impact in ways that you may not be able to see.
All right. I think I can bring back Miss Mariah. Are you there, Miss Mariah? She's not there. Torian, your last thoughts.
Yeah. I'll start with my human perspective on this. That we need to hear other perspectives. I think that for the most part, all of us as black men and women, we generally are on the same page. We think the same and kind of about the perspective. We have the same perspective on things that need to happen, and everything that's going on with current events. But the conversation, I think it was Janice that said, it is for the long haul, and we definitely have to continue with the same spirit that we are now. Let's continue conversation, because everything does stalking. We're talking to other people outside of our comfort zone. And from the faith perspective, I have to mention that we don't fight against the flesh, flesh and blood, but we fight against principalities. And I think if we engage culture with that mindset that it is not really a black and white thing, it is a heart issue. And so only Jesus Christ can change the heart of a man. And so until we agree on that and engage culture from that perspective, nothing will change, whether that's a conviction or not a conviction. We have to deal with it from a spiritual, from a heart perspective.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, I am pleasantly pleased to have somebody said here, Jesus overturned tables. Krista said, Jesus overturned tables. Yes, he did. When they were unjust and they were in the temple, Jesus did come and he disrupted the injustice or the sin or the misdealings within the sacred temple. I want to close with this thought here. I think that right now in America, we're at a crossroad. And this crossroad is a place of left and right, right and wrong, for those who with and those who without. And I think America is in the middle of a class struggle. I think the 1% has developed and grown large, and people have come to the understanding that they're not part of the 1%, and we're all in this together. And what we're seeing is that people are recognizing that we're all in this together. It's not about race anymore. It's a combination of race and class. And today Americans are saying enough is enough. And we're not taking it anymore. And what's even more encouraging for those of us here in America is that we see the camaraderie of the protests and the uprisings that are taking place, and they're chanting the name of a black man, George Floyd. Yes, George Floyd was killed without any mercy, but George Floyd is reflective. His murder was a reflection of what many of us as black men deal with on a regular basis in this country and people of color. And unfortunately, it took a life of a man for us to see, not only in the world, but in America, that it ends now. That's it. I know as a priest, I get up and I have to proclaim the goodness and greatness of the gospel. That's what we're called to do. But as a man, and men, pastors throughout this country, we struggle with the man and the priest every day. But America, I'm here to tell you, it's a new day. And now that we are in a position of influence and well educated and connected, and there is a generation that now has come together because of hip hop and popular culture, they don't know the problems of the 60s or 70s. They see the solutions of today. And so that gives me hope in knowing that tomorrow will be in good hands, because people are saying it ends today. Join us again this coming Sunday. I have a panel of pastors. It's going to be an on-fire conversation. We have pastors here from the South that are coming together. We have a special guest, the Reverend Mark Thompson, Matsamilla. He is a well-known, talk show host throughout America. He has hosted and MC more of the rallies that have come together around civil rights, human rights, and the like, and injustice, and seeking justice, and probably anybody alive today. So we're looking forward to that conversation this coming Sunday. We want to thank our panelists today for doing a wonderful job. We're going to have this continue this conversation, and my co-host, Mr. Torian Sitton, he said we need to continue this political conversation. If you know anything about me, I was just waiting to deal with this before us right now. We're going to talk politics a whole lot. Amen. So thank you, everybody, for coming. Let's go out with a prayer. Father God, we thank you for bringing us here today, dear Lord. We are encouraged by your presence. We're encouraged by your love, and we're strengthened by your faithfulness to us, dear Lord, even when we're not even deserving of it. We bless us now. Send thy anointing into us today. Let us rise empowered tomorrow to live empowered lives. And we thank you for your love, your joy, and your splendor. In Jesus' name we pray. We all said, amen. All right, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Come back and join us again at any time. Appreciate you all.
Thank you,
Thank
Pastor.
you.
You're blessed.
Bye-bye,
Thank
Keanu.
you.
Shout
Bye.
God bless.
Thank you, Torian, and thank you, ladies.
Thank you.
God bless. Good stuff. Good stuff.